I'm going to start tonight with a story. About 5 years ago, I was asked to do a version of this talk at a big financial services conference in Orlando, where people had the opportunity to go and hear different speakers at the same time in a series of breakout sessions. So a woman came to my talk on the science of happiness, and at the end, she came up and said, "I'm really glad I came, you were great, I really enjoyed it. And I have to be honest, I nearly skipped your presentation because I just really figured that I would hate you." And I said, "Well, thank you for that unusual compliment. And may I ask why you assumed you would hate me?" She said, "Wow, I just figured anyone who talked about happiness would be all about like kittens and rainbows. And you'd just be really irritating. And by the end of the hour, I would want to strangle you. And I don't, so thank you so much." And I start this talk with that story to illustrate something really important. There are people in the world and people in the room who are the kittens and rainbows people, who can always find that silver lining and always do really feel pretty happy. And if you're one of those people, congratulations. And this talk is going to be a wonderful affirmation of all of the things that you're doing very well in your life already. But then there are other people, and I'm one of the other people, who don't naturally and easily find happiness. So I'm going to be talking today about the science of happiness, but in my final 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about strategies that we can all use to increase our happiness no matter where we fall on that natural happiness continuum. And none of these are going to be things like sell all your belongings and move to Aruba. They're all going to be things that you can actually do and implement moving forward. But before I talk about the science of happiness, I want to talk about some errors that we make. Because the reality is one of the challenges in thinking about happiness is that many people, probably even most people, go through life looking for happiness in the wrong places. They're expecting certain things to make them happy. They pursue them. But those things aren't the secret to happiness. So I want to start by talking about some of these myths that we have. So guess what? The number one mistake people make is, in terms of thinking something will make them happy, but in reality it doesn't. That mistake is about what? Money. Good. That's good. Periodically a person will call out marriage, and it's like, it's so awkward if they're with their spouse, it's really, anyway, so money is the right answer. Good. Overwhelmingly people think, if I just had some more money, surely I would be happier. This is a picture of Tiger Woods' house, or maybe now Tiger Woods' ex-wife's house. And people think, gosh, if I lived in a house like that, wouldn't I be happy every single minute of every single day? But the reality is no. We actually adapt very quickly to newfound wealth. Initially, we're excited, and then we adjust to that new standard of living, and we think, well, if I just had a little bit more. And that power of adaptation means that looking for happiness in money is really misguided. And I want to give you a really simple example. Most people in this room are old enough that this will work for you. Who remembers the excitement about getting your very first cell phone? What could it do? What could that phone do? Make a call, maybe, right? Maybe, right? Depending on where you are. Maybe you recognize it in that picture. But it was very exciting because you might be able to call someone from the car. It was incredible. But if I took your current phone and I gave you your first phone, you'd feel very sad. Because we now expect that our phones will let us shoot a movie, buy a dress, read a book, do all these things, not just call someone from the car. And that's the challenge of adaptation. And some people have known this for a long time. As Benjamin Franklin said, money has never made man happy, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more of it one has, the more one wants. And that's the challenge. Now, before I go on, I want to say something really important. For people who are living below the poverty line, for people who are worried, are my kids going to have enough food to eat tomorrow? Are we going to have heat this winter? Do I have a safe place to sleep tonight? For people who are worried about survival, more money absolutely does increase happiness. But once you're not worried about survival, it's a never-ending game of pursuing more and more and more. So what else do we think will make us happy but really doesn't? Climate. Overwhelmingly, people think, if I just lived in a warmer, prettier climate, surely I would be happier. If you do large-scale surveys of Americans and you ask them, would you be happier if you lived in California or North Dakota? Guess what pretty much everyone says? California. Very consistent finding. And this finding actually forms the basis of a joke that I tell students. So here's the joke. Patient goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I have terrible news. You have 6 months to live. The patient says, well, that is terrible news. And what do you suggest I do? And the doctor says, you should immediately move to North Dakota. And the patient says, absolutely, I'll do that right away. And if I move to North Dakota, will I live longer? And the doctor says, no, but it'll feel like forever. People from North Dakota super don't like that joke. I found that out 3 times. But here's the reality. This is also wrong. Gallup poll a few years ago, North Dakota is one of the top 5 happiest states. California is not. So people in North Dakota are, in fact, very happy. We don't know why, but they're, in fact, very happy. What else? Life events. Overwhelmingly, we think, when this life event happens, then I'll be happy. Now, that life event changes depending on your age. When I graduate from college, when I get a job, when I get a promotion, when I buy a house, when I retire, whatever it is, when this thing happens, then I'll be happy forever. So let's take the example of a promotion that you're certain is going to make you happy. So you work harder and harder and harder. You get that promotion. All of a sudden, it turns out you have to do what? Yeah, that job, as it turns out. And that job has pressure and deadlines and colleagues, and the permanent happiness you thought was yours just isn't there. You adapt just like you adapt to climate, more money. But there is one kind of life event that's a little bit interesting, because this life event does consistently make some people happy, and that's the life event of marriage. So what the data on the science of happiness in marriage tells us is that marriage does consistently make some people happy, and those people are called men. Married men are happier than single men. They're healthier than single men. They live longer than single men. They're less likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders. And here's what's even better for the men. It doesn't matter who they're married to. Anyone is good. So, how about for women? For women, it's more complicated. Because for women, good marriage is good. Happily married women are, in fact, happier and healthier than single women. But unhappily married women are less happy and less healthy than single women. So for women, good marriage is good, but bad marriage is really bad. For men, it's all good. And so the key takeaway from that is that men should find someone, but women need to be picky. Women need to find the right someone. And what I like about that finding is that by all accounts, this setup then, it's probably better for William than for Kate. William's going to be happy. Kate, we hope so. But it's probably too early to tell. And William's mom, married to a prince, not that happy. One more example of something that overwhelmingly we anticipate will be associated with happiness, the life event of having children, becoming a parent. This is a little bit of an outdated picture of my 3 kids. Yeah, and in the picture, they seem really quiet, like clean and angelic, well-behaved. And here's the challenge, that in the abstract, in the picture, having children seems like a really good thing to do. But the reality, day in and day out, of parenthood is what? It's hard. It's really hard. I gave this talk once in a giant hotel ballroom, like 800 people, and I said, the reality, day in and day out, and a woman right in the front row yells out, hell. And it like echoed like, hell, 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 like, you know, through the ballroom. Now, in fairness, she had a 2-year-old at home. But the reality, day in and day out, of parenthood is really hard. It's playing lots of boring games with absolutely no strategy. It's doing huge amounts of laundry. It's literally touching somebody else's poop. And as Annie Lamott said, having a baby is like suddenly getting the world's worst roommate. So here's the challenge if you look at the science of happiness and parenthood. Parents do have more joy than non-parents. There's the joy of the homemade Mother's Day card, or your kid hitting a home run in Little League, or learning to swim or ride a bike. And these wonderfully special, tender moments are, in fact, bigger peaks than non-parents experience. But those highs are absolutely coupled with lows of worry and stress and heartache, and those lows are lower than non-parents experience. So what this data shows us is that parents have more highs and parents have more lows, and non-parents have a much more even keel existence. Now, sometimes I'll give one of these talks and a person will come up afterwards and they'll say, but Catherine, you have to remember, if you have children, you might get grandchildren, and grandchildren make me very happy. And what I say to that is, I am really hoping that's true. Not like imminently, but eventually. All right. So I've talked about what doesn't make us happy, but that's not why you're here. I now want to turn and talk about what does make us happy. And the good news is there are lots of things that, in fact, the scientific research tell us increase our happiness. So one, there are a variety of behaviors that we can do in our lives, very low-level behaviors that, in fact, are empirically shown to increase happiness. So eating is one of those. But it's not just the act of like chewing and swallowing. It's actually eating particular kinds of foods. What kinds of foods make us happy? Chocolate, sugars, fats. There's absolutely no evidence for happiness and like celery, for example. Now, fortunately, there's also strong data looking at the link between happiness and exercise. Who here has already heard about the link between happiness, endorphins, and exercise? Who's heard about that? Great, great. So lots of you know that data already. When you're exercising, a chemical endorphin in your body is elevated. That actually is empirically shown to increase your feelings of happiness. Plus, one of the best feelings we can have is the feeling of having exercised, right? And unfortunately, the only way to get the having exercise feeling, you have to exercise first. It's too bad. Now, in what won't be the most shocking thing I tell you tonight, lots of data suggests that shopping makes us happy, but it's more interesting than you might think. Who here has ever experienced a wonderful feeling of happiness because you were shopping and found the perfect gift for someone you care about? That feeling is actually higher than when you shop for yourself. So it's not about shopping getting things. It's actually about shopping relationship building is where you get the biggest benefits. Nature. Lots of data suggests that spending time in nature is tremendously beneficial in terms of happiness. And what's particularly remarkable is that spending time in nature is also good for our physical health. In a really simple illustration of this, researchers compared recovery rates for patients who had had a routine scheduled surgery at a hospital in Pennsylvania. The way the hospital was set up, one of the wings of the hospital overlooked a parking lot. So people assigned to that wing saw cars and asphalt and traffic. The other wing of the hospital overlooked a park. So people assigned to this wing saw trees and flowers and grass. So they compared rates of recovery for patients who had the exact same surgery but had been assigned to one of these two wings. And what they found was that compared to patients who'd been assigned to the wing overlooking the parking lot, people whose room overlooked the park got out of bed faster, needed lower levels of pain medication, had better reports from the nurses, and got discharged faster from the hospital. So every dimension they studied, simply looking at nature through a window sped up your recovery from surgery. In a very recent study to try to understand what's going on, researchers brought in people and they put them in an MRI machine to measure brain activation. Then they showed them different pictures. I'm going to show you now 2 actual pictures that were used in this study. So one of the pictures was of a very pretty urban city skyline. So there's a range of colors, there's sky, there's clouds. It's not that the picture is showing, smog or traffic, et cetera. It's a visually appealing picture. Then they also showed them pictures of rural nature scenes, such as that one. Again, visually appealing picture, range of colors, sky, clouds. So these pictures are both visually appealing, and yet patterns of brain activation were remarkably different. People who were looking at the urban city skyline showed lots of brain activation. Their brain was active, it was firing. People who were looking at the rural nature scene showed relaxed, calm brain waves, like they were meditating or sleeping. And so this finding suggests that just looking at nature may in fact be physiologically relaxing to the brain, and that may help us devote more of the body's resources to recovering from surgery. I started today's talk by describing the role of personality. And I said some people are the kittens and rainbows people and some people are not. And the reality is personality exerts a very strong influence on our happiness. And that's why some things like getting a raise, better climate, so on, don't bring us consistent happiness. As Martha Washington said, I am still determined to be cheerful and happy in whatever situation I may be. For I've also learned from experience that the greater part of our happiness or misery depends upon our dispositions and not upon our circumstances. So what is it about personality that really matters? And research points to 3 distinct variables. One of those is extroversion. People who are extroverted are outgoing, they like to meet new people, do new things, and so on. They probably find it easier to maintain and form a social network. So extroversion is one. Another is high self-esteem. They feel pretty good about themselves overall. Here's a cartoon that shows the opposite. Dear diary, sorry to bother you again. But the real way that self-esteem seems to help us is that people who feel good about themselves are very good at finding the silver lining no matter what happens. I'm going to tell you now about a little bit of a complicated study. So this is a time to pay attention, because otherwise some people will laugh and you'll be like, what happened? So in this study, they brought in dating couples, college student dating couples, people who are dating each other. And they said, you're going to fill out the exact same questionnaire as your dating partner. So you come into the study, and they seat you across the table from your partner. So one person turns to the first page of their questionnaire, and it says, where did you meet? How long have you been dating? And their partner's sitting just right across from them. They turn to their first page, and it says, where'd you meet? How long have you been dating? That's not the complicated part. Then this person turns to the second page of their questionnaire, and their questionnaire says, please list everything you hate about your dating partner. So you start writing, kind of messy, kind of stubborn, a little stingy, whatever it is. So you're writing some stuff. Their partner turns to the second page of their questionnaire, and their questionnaire says, please list absolutely every single item in your dorm room. So you start writing. I got my books, I got my futon, I got my pillows, I got my shoes, I got my computer, I've got my posters, whatever. And you're writing and writing and writing. And this person's looking at you. And they're going like, why are they using the back? Then everyone turns to the third page, and the third page says, how do you feel about your relationship? Now, here's what's remarkable. People who are high in self-esteem, who have sat there and watched what appears to be their partner getting a hand cramp, frantically writing 500 things they hate about them, they say, I love my partner so much. They hate 500 things about me, and we're still together. So this is a wonderful turn of event. This is like my soulmate. This is like fate. They will never leave me. The love is so strong. And that's the power of high self-esteem, that you take what should be a relationship damning experience and you find that silver lining. One more personality trait that operates in much the same way, the personality trait of optimism. People who are optimistic, again, have this ability to find the silver lining no matter what. Freud told a story about a couple who came to see him in therapy, and at one point during the course of the therapy session, the husband turned to the wife and said, if one of us were to die, I think I would go live in Paris. You know, because if it was one of us, it'd be you. You know, I have this Paris plan. My oldest son has a remarkable ability to do this kind of optimistic thinking. Andrew was in public school from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 9th grade, he moved to this elite prep school that he was woefully underprepared for, and he struggled mightily in every possible academic discipline. But he struggled especially in Spanish. And he struggled enough in Spanish that midway through his first trimester, he received a warning grade of a 50. This is a school that uses the traditional 1 to 100 grading scale, so 50 was really not good. So in November, Andrew calls me at the end of November and goes, Mom, you know, got my grades, first trimester, good news about Spanish. And I said, oh, thank goodness, because I was so worried, you know what, with the 50. And he's like, yes, it's good news. I said, great, what'd you get? And he goes, I got a 58. And I said, that is not good news. And he goes, no, it's 8 points higher than I had in October. And I said, you got an F. You got an F in Spanish. And he goes, Mom, it's really an F+. And I said, I'm a professor. Like, that's not an option. Like, there's never a plus after the F. It's, like, not even a choice. And he goes, well, you know, at the rate I'm going, I'm going to have a 66 in January. And I said, you know, that's a D. Like, that's also bad. But here really is the good news about Andrew and Andrew's life, is that by all accounts, you know, someday he's going to end up in prison. And hopefully not a Spanish-speaking prison. But anyway, but he's going to be fine, because he's going to call home and be like, Mom, I got this bunk bed. I got a roommate. There's this exercise yard. They bring in the meals through the door. It's so relaxing. Because anyone who can call home with the good news about the F+ is going to be fine. I mean, he's going to be poor and living in my basement, but he's going to be happy. And this ability to find the silver lining, no matter what, is tremendously important. I'm going to share with you now one of my favorite quotes that perfectly illustrates this, and it's by Nelson Mandela. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. There were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. So this ability to find the silver lining no matter what is tremendously predictive. And the good news for all of us is that our ability to do that seems to increase with age. We actually get better at finding some kind of silver lining with some age, with some adversity. And I want to turn now to talk about the really important role of age as a predictor of happiness. I'm going to show you some data that was collected within the United States, hundreds of thousands of people, a big Gallup poll, and it was collected on adults ages 18 to 85. So I'm going to show you the data and we'll talk about what it means. But what's most important is that this shape of the data curve looks exactly the same in every single country that they've studied. So this is not a uniquely American finding. It actually appears to be a universal truism. So here's the data. And what you can see here on the far left is that people who are ages 18 to 21 are very happy. And again, what the hell is there not to be happy about when you're 18 to 21? Then, in what is bad news for some people here, including me, happiness drops like a stone right up until around age 50. And that, of course, corresponds with what we think about in our society as a midlife crisis. It's also, perhaps coincidentally, an age at which many people have teenagers living in their home. But then, in what is good news for every single person here, happiness increases in your 60s, in your 70s, and again, they've studied people up to age 85. And what you see in this chart is that at around 70, you hit the happiness you had at 18 to 21, and then you get happier still. And so this is really a remarkable and very cross-culturally consistent finding. So to examine what explains this finding that people in their 70s and 80s are experiencing higher levels of happiness, researchers have done qualitative interviews about how people structure and spend their time. And here's what they find. Younger people are very focused on having big social networks, what I like to call Facebook friends. Lots and lots of people, but you're not particularly close or connected to many of them. What people do in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they get rid of the riffraff and they focus on high quality relationships. So they're basically making a choice of having high quality relationships with fewer people as opposed to lots of relationships. And this finding is perfectly illustrated in the following Peanuts cartoon. As we grow up, we realize it is less important to have lots of friends and more important to have real ones.
I saw that on Facebook yesterday.
Really? That's amazing. That's so great. I love that. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. There's a positive of Facebook. And so this is a very, very consistent finding that when we talk about what predicts happiness, the single best predictor is, in fact, the quality of our relationships. Now, I've talked about relationships before. Marriage, if you're a man. Children for no one. But the good news is relationships do make us happy. They just don't have to have specific labels. You can have happiness from having good friends, from being close with family members, from being close with dating partners that you're not married to. What matters isn't the label on the relationship. What matters is the quality of the relationship. But here's the challenge that we're all facing. The way we have good relationships is by having intimate, real, authentic conversations. And there's lots of evidence now that that's getting harder for one very key reason. Who here has ever been somewhere, a restaurant, a park, an airport, whatever, seen two people together in which each of them are on their cell phone? Who's ever seen that? Happens all the time. There you go. That's right. That's right. You're too busy. Yes, that's right. You never looked up. Really simple study illustrated the hazards of cell phones on our ability to have these relationships. They brought in people who wanted to have a get-to-know-you conversation with a stranger. They paired them up in private rooms. Half the people just had this 15, 20-minute conversation with a stranger. The other half of people, before the conversation started, the researcher took her cell phone. She turned it off. And she then put it on the table right in between the two people. So the cell phone is turned off. It's not going to ring. It's not going to vibrate. Cell phone also belongs to the researcher. It doesn't belong to the two people having the conversation. And yet what they found was the presence of that phone turned off on the table led to a lower quality of conversation. Less intimate, less meaningful, less vulnerable. And that's a phone that's turned off and doesn't belong to either people in the conversation. So that's a remarkable finding, and it really illustrates the hazards of the presence of cell phones in terms of their ability to distract us from paying attention to precisely the people that we should be building these good relationships with. I want to turn now to some overall conclusions from the field of positive psychology. I started today's talk by describing individual differences, the power of genetics, the kittens and rainbows people and the other people. And the reality is, about 50% of our happiness is determined by our genes. And that's probably driven largely through things like extroversion, self-esteem, optimism, those personality traits that I described earlier. As this cartoon says, I could cry when I think of the years I wasted accumulating money, only to learn that my cheerful disposition is genetic. So yeah, the reality is, for some people, happiness really is far easier to find. But here's the key. This also means that 50% of our happiness is not genetic. And that's the part I care about, because that's the part that we can all do something about, no matter where we fall on that happiness genetic lottery. I've talked from the very beginning today about the power of our capacity to adapt. And what I've said again and again is this is really a bad thing, because all these good things happen. You get a raise, you have better climate, you get a promotion, you have more money, you win the lottery, whatever it is, and you just adapt and adapt and adapt, so all these good things don't really pay off. But here's what's really important about our capacity to adapt. It works both ways, that we also have an ability to adapt to bad events. And this is a really important finding. I'm now going to tell you about a really difficult story. And given where this talk is occurring, this will probably be familiar to many people in this room. And it's the story of the family of Dr. William Pettit. So as you may remember, this was a family living in a small town in Connecticut a few years ago. Husband, wife, 2 daughters. One night, 2 men who'd recently been released from jail broke into their home. They tied up the dad in the basement. They tied the mom and the 2 girls to their beds and proceeded to sexually assault all 3 of them. The girls were ages 11 and 17. Then, to hide evidence of their crimes, the men set the house on fire. The dad was able to escape from the basement. He had a head injury, but he lived. But the mom and both daughters died of smoke inhalation. So most of us hear that story and think, how could he ever find happiness again? He's lost his wife, he's lost both of his kids, and he hasn't just lost them. He's lost them in about the most horrific set of circumstances that we can wrap our minds around. And for most of us, it seems impossible to imagine moving forward after experiencing that depth of loss and tragedy. And yet, here's a picture of William Pettit from a couple of years ago. He met a woman who volunteered as a photographer for the foundation he established to honor his family's memory. Over time, they became friends. They fell in love. His first wife's family attended their wedding and said, "We're so happy that you have found someone to share your life with again." And a couple of Decembers ago, they welcomed a little boy. So that doesn't mean that he's the same happy. And it doesn't mean that the tragedy doesn't change and shape and influence him in fundamental ways and always will. But what this story speaks to is the power of the human spirit. That all of us, no matter what, have the ability to find happiness again, even following loss and tragedy. And the reality is, for most of us, happiness involves the power of effort. We have to decide that we want to be happy. We have to decide that we deserve to be happy. And we have to be willing to structure our lives in ways that bring us that happiness. As Elizabeth Gilbert says, happiness is the consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. You have to participate relentlessly in the manifestations of your own blessings. And once you have achieved a state of happiness, you must never become lax about maintaining it. You must make a mighty effort to keep swimming upward into that happiness forever, to stay afloat on top of it. And I'm now going to turn, as promised, to strategies that we can all use. Because here's my hope in giving this talk. I hope you've learned something. I've hoped you've laughed some. But mostly, I hope that every single person here and watching it will decide to do something differently in their lives moving forward to increase their own happiness. And I give you 10 because I'm hoping that I will touch everyone who hears it with one of these 10, that you will find something that speaks to you. I also want to say that my very last slide will be my email address. And if anybody would like a copy for free of this entire presentation, you can just send me an email and I'll just send it right out to you. So if you'd like to have it back to reflect on, that's absolutely fine. And again, as promised, none of these things are sell all your belongings, move to Aruba. They're all things you can do. 1, change your behavior. There are lots of low-level things that we can do to increase our happiness. Who here gets enough sleep? Raise your hand. All right, so that's pretty good. Maybe that's about half of you. That's good. Some more of you could adopt this one. Who here makes a point of exercising regularly? Raise your hands. So that's more hands, and here's what's odd. Sleeping is easier than exercising. Spend time outside. Who makes a point of spending time outside? Good. Given where you all live, you should be doing this. What a beautiful part of the country. Does anyone here meditate? Great, great. I see a number of hands. If you don't do that one already, lots of evidence is now suggesting the benefits of meditation for psychological well-being, also for physical health. So if you don't do this one already, this one's pretty cheap, it's pretty easy, and it's a great thing to start as a New Year's resolution. 2, find your match, professionally and personally. And this means find what you're good at. Find what you love. This could be in your career, it could be in your community, it could be in your religious organization, it could be in your family, and it could be anything. It could be gardening, it could be writing, it could be tutoring. It doesn't matter what it is. Figure out what you're good at and find opportunities to put those skills to good use. As Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. But it's also really important to find this match at a personal level. There's a scale in psychology, and it's called the sensation-seeking scale. And what this scale measures is the extent to which you feel happy under conditions of high physiological arousal, heart beating fast, rapid muscle tension, pit in your stomach, etc. Some people love that feeling. Some people hate that feeling. Doesn't matter which one you are. This isn't like IQ where high is good. But what matters is that you figure out which one you are, because different situations make different people happy. So I'm going to give you a quick quiz. I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you have to raise your hand for whichever one best describes you, so you get a sense of where you might fall on this dimension. Some people would like to parachute out of an airplane. Some people would like to never parachute out of an airplane. Raise your hand if you're one of the parachute jumpers. All right, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you're one of the smart people. All right, so that's 1. 2. Some people, when they go into a pool, go toe, knee, ankle, thigh. Some people, when they go into a pool, dive, cannonball right in. Who are the toe, knee, ankle, thigh people? And who are the dive, cannonball people? Okay. 3. Some people, when they go on vacation, like the excitement and adventure of camping outdoors. Some people, when they go on vacation, like the warmth and comfort of a luxury hotel. Who are the campers? Raise your hands. And who are the luxury hotel people? Yeah. I say to my husband, your camping wife is your second wife. But again, it doesn't matter who you are. What matters is that you figure out who you are, because different situations make different people happy. 3, read a book you love. And how wonderful to do that in this space. Who here remembers reading a book that you didn't want to end? It's a wonderful feeling of happiness, right? And it doesn't matter what the book is. It just has to be a book that speaks to you. This is my husband's favorite book. It's a little dark. But people who've read it are like, oh, my word. But he loves the father-son story. He loves the writing. It absolutely speaks to him. So it doesn't matter what the book is. Find books that you love. Pour yourself into those. It's a wonderful way of finding more happiness. 4, keep a gratitude journal. Who here goes to sleep at night thinking about their to-do list and the problems that they're facing? So this is like a different idea. So this idea is to only go to sleep at night after writing down 2 or 3 things that you are grateful for in your life right now. And the right now part is important. It can't be things I'll be grateful for once I retire, once I win the lottery, once I whatever. Things you're grateful for right now. As Dale Carnegie said, one of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We are all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. 5, make a gratitude visit. This is one of my favorites. This idea came from a professor of psychology, Marty Seligman, who works at Penn. And what he has people do is to think about a person who changed and shaped their life in some fundamental way. Could be a boss, could be a teacher, could be a mentor, but somebody who had a major impact on who you became. Then you write that person a letter, you travel to them, you stand in front of them and read the letter aloud. That is a tremendously impactful experience for the person, of course, who's reading the letter, and of course for the person who's hearing the letter. And here's the challenge. In our society, guess when we typically express what someone meant to us? Funeral. Do it in a eulogy. So this idea is to not wait for the eulogy. This idea is to tell the person while you still can. So when I think about the person who played this role in my own life, it was my 7th and 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Doherty had been a Marine in World War II, and he had lost his right arm picking up a grenade. So he had a stump on his right arm. And he had this giant metal hook that strapped around his body, and then he had this claw on the end of it. And he would write on the chalkboard with this claw. I went to public school. He also smoked throughout the entire day. And sometimes he would blow it outside, but also sometimes not. So he was terrifying. He had this claw and this stump and the smoke, and he was big and red and terrifying. But every paper that I did for Mr. Doherty, he covered in red. Unpack, organize, detail, structure. And Mr. Doherty taught me how to write. And I am talking to you tonight because I know how to write. I have an undergraduate degree from Stanford. I have a doctoral degree from Princeton. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because of Mr. Doherty in 7th and 8th grade. That's why I have the career that I have. And when I learned that he had died, I wrote his widow a letter, and I told her that. So if you have someone in your life who played that role, write the letter. 6, smile, even when you aren't happy. So this is the fake it till you make it idea. We often think that we smile if we're happy, but the reality is just smiling can actually make you feel happier. As philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh says, sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, but sometimes your smile can be the source of your joy. And what is particularly remarkable is that the mere act of smiling seems to change our body's physiological reaction to pain. In a very clever study, they brought in people and they had them hold chopsticks in their teeth in one of 3 facial expressions. A neutral expression, a mild smile, or a big beaming smile. Then, while you were holding this facial expression, you had to put your hand in a bucket of freezing cold ice water. And they said, keep it there as long as you can, and when you can't stand it anymore, pull your hand out. And what they found was that people holding the big beaming smile kept their hand in the water significantly longer. The mere act of smiling changed how their body responded to pain. 7, perform random acts of kindness. Now, you've already heard about this one, but this is a remarkably important one because basically anything counts. People who volunteer in their community, higher levels of happiness. People who donate to charity, higher levels of happiness. I'm going to show you next a map of the world. Every country that's colored green, positive correlation between charitable giving and happiness. What you can see, it's a universal phenomenon. Very consistent finding. Give a gift to anyone. In a remarkable series of studies, they've brought in people, they've put them in an MRI machine to measure patterns of brain activation. They've had to think about giving a gift to a friend. If you just think about giving a gift to a friend, a part of the brain is activated that is the same part of the brain that is activated when you process rewarding experiences. The exact same part of the brain that is activated when you eat chocolate. Also when you use cocaine, but that's like a less good example. 8, spend money on the right things. I started today by saying, yeah, there's no association between money and happiness, but the reality is you can spend money in better and worse ways. What's good? Spending money on experiences. So that could be tickets to the big game or a Broadway show or travel or a concert. Spending money on experiences lets you anticipate them, experience them, and reflect back on them. Where do you not get such a big bang for your buck? Spending money on belongings. Expensive, watch, purse, car, whatever. Initially it's exciting, and then it's just your watch. As no one says on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. No one is thinking that. And as philosopher Roger Corliss says, trying to be happy by accumulating possessions is like trying to satisfy hunger by taping sandwiches all over your body. It just doesn't work. Avoid comparisons. And this, I think, is a really tricky one in that many people actually feel totally happy right up until they start comparing themselves to other people, and then they feel worse. This cartoon says, I do count my blessings, but then I end up counting those of others who have more and better blessings, and that pisses me off. Or as Teddy Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And one of the things that makes this one so hard these days is the presence of what I like to call fake book, in which people write mostly about what? The good stuff. My kid is valedictorian. I just ran the Boston Marathon in under 3 hours, again. Our whole family went to Tahiti for 2 weeks and loved each other the whole time. And so when I'm on social media, I try to write things like, all of my kids have lice. Which I am telling you more often than not really seems like it's been my existence. But here's the wonderful thing about comparisons. We actually get to choose the nature of the comparisons that we make. We can make comparisons that make us feel better. We can make comparisons that make us feel worse. When my son, the Spanish scholar, was on the verge of being tossed from his prep school, I had a cousin who at the same time had a son with leukemia. And every day I said to myself, Sarah, my cousin, wishes Parker, her son, were failing Spanish in high school instead of having chemotherapy. And that was true. I was lucky. And that's the key about comparisons, that we all have the opportunity to shape the nature and direction of comparisons that we make, and we can do so in ways that make us feel better or ways that make us feel worse. It's actually up to us. 10. Build and maintain close relationships. Now, this is the last one, and it's the last one for a reason. It's the most important. It's the single best predictor of our happiness. But here's the reality. Relationships are hard. They require conflict and compromise and vulnerability and time and energy and effort. They don't happen by magic. They happen because we're willing to invest in them. And I use this picture as a metaphor. It's a dancer on point. If you look at a dancer on point in a distance, it looks magical, looks easy, beautiful. But the reality of dancing on point is that your toes are bruised and calloused and bloodied, and it hurts. And it's only to look at it from a distance that looks easy. And my final quote for you today speaks to this, and it's by Tolstoy. But on entering upon family life, he saw at every step that it was utterly different from what he had imagined. At every step, he experienced what a man would experience who, after admiring the smooth, happy course of a little boat on a lake, should get himself into that little boat. He saw that it was not all sitting still, floating smoothly, that one had to think too, not for an instant to forget where one was floating, and that there was water under one, and that one must row, and that his unaccustomed hands would be sore, and that it was only to look at it that was easy, but that doing it, though very delightful, was very difficult. And that's the reality. Close relationships are the single best predictor of our happiness, but we don't get those relationships without investing time and energy and effort. And my final slide for you today is a picture of my lovely dog. And I use this picture for a reason, to illustrate a fundamental point. Pets bring us what kind of love? Unconditional. And that's why, for many people, pets are a great source of happiness. They don't actually require the same conflict and compromise and time and energy. I gave this talk a few years ago in Dallas, and a man came up at the end, and he goes, I have the perfect illustration. Imagine that you come home from work one night, and you put your wife and your dog in the trunk of a car, and then you drive around for an hour. At the end of the hour, when you open up the trunk, guess who's still happy to see you? Then that man told me he was divorced, and I'm like, really? I can't imagine. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have the 3 kids. You saw the picture earlier. We have this lovely dog, and we have the following deal. If one of us leaves the other one, the one who leaves takes the 3 kids. And the other one gets this lovely dog. And that has kept our relationship very strong and very committed because no one can leave. So you all have been a lovely audience. We are going to take questions, but before we do that, I just want to give you my email address, and I'll keep this up here. Sometimes a person has a question they don't really want to ask in this forum, and so it's 100% fine for you to email me your question, and I will respond to you. And that's absolutely fine. So my email is up there. If you would also like a copy for free of this entire presentation, just shoot me an email and I will send out the presentation to you as well. You can watch a video of this talk on my website, which is Sanderson Speaking. I'm on Instagram talking lots about happiness. And if anyone is really interested, I have a book out, The Positive Shift, that examines this, all of what I've talked about in much more detail if you want to really sort of learn more about this topic. So I'm delighted to turn out for questions. You all have been a lovely audience, and I hope you've gotten something you can use moving forward.